Hi, I'm Dr. Dorinda Rolle, and in this four-part webinar series on organizational leadership being brought to you by the SA Beacon and myself, we're beginning part 4, and we've talked a lot about in parts 1, 2, and 3 about what do we mean by leadership. And I talked about the 4 types of ethical theories, and now I want to talk about ethical leadership and what that looks like. So nonprofit organizations, as well as businesses and other types of organizations, whether they're all volunteer or whether people are paid to work there, ethical leadership is established by the cultural values, norms, expectations, and models of behavior. When we talk about ethical leadership, it cannot exist within an organization if the leaders themselves do not operate in an ethical manner. So ethical leaders take the lead in establishing organization-wide ethics policies. Those things don't just happen in a vacuum or pop up out of nowhere. Very often, if the leaders within an organization, and it could be the board, or it could be the business owner, or whoever the corporate leaders are, if they don't take the lead in saying that this is a priority throughout the organization, no matter who you are, these are the expectations of behavior. You also have to implement a zero tolerance policy when there are ethical violations, no matter how large or how small. And as I say that, I'm not saying that we cannot exercise grace and forgiveness, but you really do have to think about what it looks like to have an ethical organization. Ethical leaders must implement a zero tolerance policy for unethical behavior, no matter how large or how small. I'm reminded of a story that my mother told me years ago. She worked in a hospital and had been at the same place for over 35 years as a nurse. So being in the same place for so long, she made a lot of friends, and as I was growing up, I knew the people that she worked with. I remember one day she came home and she told us about a gentleman who had been working with her for years, and he was on the janitorial staff, and he was terminated. And my mother told me the reason that he was terminated because he stole toilet paper. And I thought, oh my gosh, they fired him just for stealing toilet paper? And she looked at me and she said, it doesn't matter what he stole, it was wrong. And so I thought, wow, isn't there any way, couldn't he just give it back or pay for it? And she explained to me that no, you cannot do that. Because if he had been allowed to do that, then the next person who did that, we'd also expect the same treatment. So everybody has to be treated the same way when it comes to ethics. You also have to cultivate ethical leaders. Ethical leaders don't just come out of nowhere. You have to cultivate them by selecting people who follow the lead of an ethical leader. You let people know that this is the way that we operate within this organization and that it's important to us. There also must be a commitment to shaping the organization's culture. Ethical leaders don't just present a model of ethical leadership, but they also decide and look for ways that they can improve and be better within the organization. That being said, there have been some ethical failures with leaders. There have been several that have been in the news, and I want to just talk a little bit about sometimes perception is even more important than reality. Years ago, in 2015, as a matter of fact, we've all heard about the Wounded Warriors Project. Good work that they do, especially in the San Antonio, Texas area where there are so many military people. Well, there was a big scandal that the Wounded Warrior Project at the national level, not the San Antonio chapter, had been accused of spending and wasting money. And it was actually called a spending scandal. And what happened there was that 2 of the top people were terminated from their jobs, the CEO and the CFO. There was also a congressional investigation. Well, at the end of the investigation, it turns out that they had not had lavish spending in relation to the amount of money that they spent on the services that they were created to provide for warriors coming home. What happened was they didn't present a good case before the public in terms of what they were doing and the ethics of how the organization operated. They put out in their news information that went out, the person that presented the story was not who that should have come from. It should have come from a leader at the top. Now, because the CEO and the CFO had both been terminated, someone from the board of directors, whose job it is to govern the organization, should have been on camera to answer the questions, and not a lower level employee being toted out for the public to answer those questions about what they were doing. As a consequence, their donations dropped by $70 million. So to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, and this is all public information that I'm talking about, in 2014, they brought in $372 million. In 2015, the year of the scandal, the donations dropped to $302 million. In 2016, donations had dropped to $211 million, and they still have not recovered from that in 2019. And so what ethical leaders need to do is to pay attention not only what happens inside of their organization, but to look at what is going on in the environment around them. A couple of years ago, we had the Me Too movement that had to do with sexual harassment that women have experienced primarily in the workplace. So a lot of that has grown out of women who had been harassed in the workplace as well as other areas, and they begin to speak out about that. So in the nonprofit arena, just as an example, the Humane Society of America, their CEO had been alleged to have harassed several women. Well, the board had an investigation that was conducted by an outside firm. And despite what the findings were of that investigation, the board decided to retain that CEO. Well, some of the board members, and particularly the women on that board, decided that they were not going to stand for it, that that person had to leave, and consequently, the CEO of that organization did resign from that job. But again, not until it had been in the news and all over social media and everywhere else. So those kinds of things have a negative effect on the organization. When we have unethical behavior that happens within an organization, it is very important to handle the communication. And what I'm talking about is crisis communication. First of all, you have to gather all of the facts, and you must get in front of the crisis and talk to the public or your donors or your customers or clients about what has happened and what you're doing about it. You must prep your spokesperson, which has to be the right person. You don't want to ask a lower level employee to speak on behalf of the organization when there should be higher ups, people who are in leadership and who are ethically looked at to be the spokesperson. You should also communicate internally first. When things have happened that are unethical, talk to the people within the organization first, and then the public. So I have some other resources that you may be interested in looking at if you're interested in studying more about organizational ethics and how it affects your organization and what you may be able to do to protect your organization from unethical behavior. I am Dr. Dorinda Rolle, and we have presented a 4-part series on organizational ethics. If you're interested in learning more about organizational ethics, or you'll be interested in having me to come and engage with your organization about how you can create organizational values, organizational ethics policies, or codes of behavior, I can be reached at dorindarolle.com. That's DORINDAROLLE.com.